Get ready!
Every generation of gaming has its trends. Back in the late 80s to early 90s, it was platformers. Seems like you could take any generic animal character or new movie and just slap it in a platforming game. They made one of Home Improvement, if that says anything. Then we had the mid to late 90s, where things like fighting games and racers ruled the roost, on top of more platformers in 3D. During the 7th generation, it seemed like every month had a handful of bland first-person military shooters and third-person shooters, followed by where we are now with open-world games. The 6th generation didn't really have a trend, or at least not one I could find, but there was a sort of boom that spanned from the end of the 5th to sometime in the 7th. Extreme sports games. Ever since the first Tony Hawk Pro Skater game hit the scene and was renamed to Tony Hawk Skateboarding in the UK for some weird reason, companies kept making knockoff after knockoff to once again prove they know nothing of supply and demand. If people already have Tony Hawk and there isn't anything better than Tony Hawk on the market, they're basically trying to sell sand to someone living in the Sahara Desert. Still, companies flooded the market with cash-in attempts covering different sports like BMX and rollerblading, getting different celebrity endorsements and trying different control schemes, which did absolutely nothing to topple the juggernaut that was the Pro Skater series and all its spin-offs. It took diminishing returns and waning relevancy to do that. However, even within a trend, there will always be those looking to really stand out and make something different. In the case of extreme sports games, I doubt there's a weirder game than Yanya Caballista, a game I've never heard of before with a name I don't think actually means anything. Even when I tried looking up the title online, I didn't come across much, although I did learn it was developed by Cave, a name I didn't recognize in the slightest. Turns out they're best known as a developer of arcade bullet hell shooters, with their most well-known being the legendary Mushihime-sama. They also apparently co-developed that Shin Megami Tensei MMO, so that's something. So a company known for a genre characterized by extremely high difficulty and having 100 million billion tiny projectiles on screen decides to dip their toe in other genres, and in 2001 tried to make a skateboarding game because why not? Which is always neat to see. The only way for genres and mediums to progress is for people to experiment, and they were all for experimentation with this project. For better or worse. It's probably mostly worse. One thing they certainly did right is the art design. Let's get that out of the way first, since it's the sole reason I picked this game up when I found it for like $5. I really like the game's aesthetic. It's very thick, cell shading look that reminds me a lot of Jet Set Radio, something I consider a standout game of the 6th generation. The box art already hits you with this wave of fun designs and bright colors, and one strangely outlined drawing behind the title. And the game itself doesn't look exactly the same, but still very charming. The characters have fun designs to make them recognizable and give them personality, which is good since they don't show much otherwise. Levels are full of bold colors and vibrant elements that make them eye-catching. HUD elements are large and clear with blocky letters like you'd find on stencil graffiti, and even the menus have an energetic look to them. Unfortunately, I don't think it's perfect or even a particularly important showing of the style. While I like the bold colors and outlines, it still lacks the shading or detail to really make the style work. Jet Set Radio is a better example of cell shading in my opinion, because it gives characters and environments more form and clearer shadows to really pop. It looks so distinct because they made sure to pull it off right, giving it the appearance of graffiti come to life. In contrast, Yanya Caballista's flatter shading and blander backgrounds makes it look like Jet Set Radio mixed with an early 2000s American cartoon. So, Jet Set Rocket Power. Anyone remember that show? I do, but really just that I watched it, and Tony Hawk was in an episode at one point. That's all I remember. But that's not to say it's bad, just not the best example I can think of when it comes to cell shading in games. A bit cartoony for my liking. Speaking of cartoony, the premise sounds straight out of something you'd see in an early 2000s Cartoon Network show that gets maybe one season before getting canceled. In a city known as New San Francisco, don't ask what happened to the old one, a mysterious alien race invades, known as the Gawoo. Gawu? Gawo? Malkov Dawovs?
Come, get serious!
Who look like something extremely questionable, but let's describe them as albino domo-coons with worms sticking out of their heads. Now, the Gawoo are seemingly invincible to all forms of conventional weaponry. Nothing can hurt them, and they soon threaten to take over the world Somehow, they just seem to be standing around, and there are people going about their business just fine, but we'll just have to take their word for it, I guess. Luckily, despite being immune to things like knives, bullets, explosives, and probably straight-up nukes, they must have tried that at some point, they have one very specific weakness that can potentially save the world. Skateboarding. Yep. For some reason, these other planetary invaders with immunity to all the weapons in the world literally shrivel up and die when they see someone pull off a cool trick using a plank of wood with wheels on it. And what do you know, there just so happens to be a gang of skateboarders in the very city they're trying to take over. Then again, I'd imagine skateboarding is a popular enough hobby they'd find a group to oppose them no matter where they go. These are the titular Cabalistas, by the way. Turns out that's an in-game slang word for skater, while in the real world, it's Spanish for horseman, as in a person who rides horses, not a literal half-horseman. I don't get it either. Why the Gawoo die specifically when they see skateboard tricks, I have no idea, but I imagine the situation would be much easier to deal with if they had access to YouTube. Sadly, this game came out in 2001, so the best option left is having a bunch of random teenagers and an old lady and some weird fish person thing kickflip at them until they give up. Now it's up to the ragtag group to go through 5 levels, skating around the place to clear out the Gawoo, and preventing their possible plans for world domination. Like I said, very cartoony and dumb. And like I also said, at least it has some nice visual personality to fill in the blanks. Before we get to work though, it's best to go to the tutorial first, just to make sure I get to grips with it. And oh man, this is one awkward beast, let me tell you. So starting off, you know how sensible games let you hold the controller like this? You know, holding it in a way that makes sense for an average person, gripping both sides in a way that contours to human hands? Well, just forget that, because this game makes you hold the controller like this. Yep, the controls for this game make you hold the controller sideways, specifically with the left analog stick on the bottom. Originally, the game released with a little skateboard thing to attach to your controller, kind of like Tech Deck, if anyone remembers that too. Man, this is just turning into early 2000s, the game. Anyway, the point of the skateboard was to convey the bizarre control scheme easier. You control your character using only the analog sticks. Think something like a very early precursor to the Skate series. Keep in mind, I'm going to explain these controls in reference to how I'm holding it. So, you move forward by tilting both sticks forward and stop by pulling them back, accompanied by the loudest stopping sound I have ever heard. You turn to one side by tilting both sticks appropriately, ollie by clicking the bottom stick, and pull a U-turn by clicking down on the top stick. Sound like a pain so far? Well, wait until you hear about the 3 tricks you can pull off. And no, I didn't stutter, you only have 3 possible tricks in this game. There are only 2 buttons to this. Did you expect the versatility and variety of something like Tony Hawk or basically any good skateboarding game? Nope. In this game, you can only perform spin, flip, and grab. That's it. You spin by flicking both sticks in opposite directions, flip by clicking the bottom stick, and grab by clicking the top stick. There aren't even different tricks for each character, so that's pretty disappointing. You can also grind, but those only keep your combo meter from going down. They don't actually count as tricks. So you have even less variety in tricks you can do. Great. Honestly, this is probably my biggest problem with the game in terms of just basic design. I can handle the weird control scheme, but the fact I'm so limited in what I can do really makes the game less interesting to play. One of the things that makes a skateboarding game fun for me, and what I imagine would be most people, is the ability to string together combos of crazy moves as a test of skill. It's really satisfying to pull off long combo chains in something like Tony Hawk or Ollie Ollie, because they let you do so much and mastering it feels rewarding. By only having a small number of basic tricks to use, the game starts feeling very repetitive very quickly, since you can't change your approach from run to run. For the record, you can make trick combos, but they're still very restrictive. You can make a chain of up to 4 flips, do grabs or flips while spinning, and grip the entire length of a spin, but for some reason I don't get, you can only do combos in a specific sequence. Spins have to be done first, you can't do one if you already performed a flip or a grab, and you can't flip or spin if you've already done a grab, because for some reason, despite having such a small number of things to do, it still somehow screws up inputs. There were plenty of times throughout the game where it felt like the controls just wouldn't respond for no clear reason. Not only could I not do the trick out of sequence, sometimes I couldn't do more than one trick at a time. Why? I'd do one flip and they'd just be standing still in the air for the rest of the time, even if I pressed the commands at the same pace as successful combos. I have no clue if I was entering them incorrectly, or if the window for inputs is just really small, or if the game's controls are just, well, bad. It's probably the last one. Maybe. For whatever reason, it makes the game a pain to control, and I probably don't have to remind you that having awkward controls in a skill-centric game is like serving a pizza without cooking the crust, just a disappointing and unwieldy event that needed more time in the oven. So now that we have the controls down like a successful analogy in a YouTube video, let's actually dive into the levels and see how things go. The first level takes place downtown and provides a good outline for how the game is structured. See, in order to get rid of the gawoo, you land tricks while they're watching you. For them to watch you, you just need to enter the little circle around them at some point while completing inputs. As you perform tricks, you reduce their health until they die. Again, how does this work? Then you gain access to the next section when all the current ones are gone. Sounds easy, right? Sadly, not every gawoo can be approached in the same way. In what I assume was an attempt to make levels more interesting, several gawoo have specific physical characteristics showing special conditions. For example, there are ones colored green, pink, and yellow, which can only take damage from landing, spins, flips, or grabs respectively. That's not so bad. It's an obvious sign that's easy to notice and respond to. The other ones aren't as easy. See, some gawoo can also be tall, short, or nearsighted, I think, meaning you have to arrange yourself in such a way where they can see you, and I found that kind of awkward when the only really noticeable indication was the circle around them. And even then, it was like super awkward. I swear, there was this one that just wouldn't notice me, even when I know for sure I entered its line of sight. And I can tell you, it's as frustrating as being unable to make a good analogy. Talking about this game is somehow mentally exhausting me as I write this. Or maybe I'm just caring less and less about trying to write fun things about this game, who knows. But the worst ones by far are the snooty gawoo. I don't even know if that's what they're called in the game, but that's just what I've named them. These lanky, bratwurst-looking, uppity snobs who think typical tricks just simply aren't impressive enough and require the silly peasants flipping around on pieces of wood to do something more fitting of their ever-so-demanding sensibilities. These things are such a pain, since you could pull off a 2160 pop shove at Superman zombie flying trebuchet rocket plant side, and they still won't take damage because you didn't make them a paradise cocktail before landing. Where did they even get off being like this? They don't have skateboarding where they're from, so how can they tell the difference? Fortunately, there weren't any snooty gawoo in the first level, so it's an okay introduction. Some were a little annoying to reach, but I managed to get through it without any problems. And last one. I guess that's... Why isn't the level ending?
This is Major Tom to ground control.
Okay, so there's a boss for each level. I guess these are the generals of the gawoo army. Fortunately, they aren't much different than normal gawoo, just do tricks until they run out of health. They have some extra obstacles like rotating mines and whatnot, but they don't add much to the encounter. Level 2 is probably my favorite one in the game. It takes place in this dock area. It's apparently a mall, I don't see it. There are so many rails to grind across to make navigation easy, and the enemies are placed well, so they aren't super out of the way. This was also the level where I started using Mei Fa, who became my default for the rest of the game for how she plays. You might notice all these stats on the character select screen divided into speed, power, and technique. These are not explained anywhere in the game as far as I know. My guess was speed being movement, but every character seems to move the same. Power is jumping ability, and technique was how many points you got pulling off tricks. Maybe the manual says something. Well, there is a character page at least, but it's just for profiles, so that's no help. But at least the manual itself is pretty cool. It has a bunch of really colorful illustrations, a combo chart, and even a full-on guide on how to beat each level, complete with precise trick timings. Oh, and they even have a little page for the first two bosses. One of them is riding a gawoo skateboard. That's pretty funny. My favorite part is how they have little dialogue from the gawoo talking about how dumb this whole thing is, right down to how they know it makes no sense for them to die watching skateboarding tricks. That's pretty great. So there's another good thing about this game. Also, I just looked it up online, and from what I can tell, speed is spin speed, power is the amount of points you get, and technique, I still don't know. Where was I? Alright. Level 3 is next, and it isn't great. It's not completely terrible. The theme's kind of neat, a sort of haunted house aesthetic, but it's so annoying to navigate because of these raised sections around the edge of the field. It was also here where I was getting used to the physics of the game, which you might have noticed are a bit off compared to regular skateboarding games. The characters fall pretty slowly, and the handling is really wide. It's floatier than most skateboarding games, but it's not something that bothered me after this level. So okay, that's 3 levels down, and it's looking pretty well so far. Not great, but maybe worth recommending. Then we get to level 4, and the main reason I want to reach for the nearest hammer to smash the disc to pieces. It takes place on a prison island, and I definitely felt like I was in prison because I was stuck here for like half my playthrough. This level is such a frustrating mess, but it only really starts to be a pain around the 3rd segment, where the reasonable enemy placement just makes like a gawoo and vanishes after seeing a sick flip. What the heck happened here? Enemies are either positioned in such a way that makes it awkward to pull off tricks, put them really out of the way, or just... I don't even know. There are some examples of annoying or inconvenient placement, but the real problems are the locations of the snooty gawoo. The last enemy in the 3rd segment is a snooty standing on top of this box on a rooftop. And like I said, snooties require some serious combos to damage, and there's barely any room to do so in this area. There's only one tiny ramp leading to it, and it's too far from the edge of the building to jump off while continuing your tricks, which is something you can do so long as you catch their attention at some point. Because of how many points you need to get rid of it, and how restricted the area is when it comes to allowing you to do so, it was obnoxious clearing this section. It took me so many tries. I spent at least 2 hours trying to figure out a way to reliably clear it out. Eventually, I managed to figure out something that worked occasionally, and I got to the second half of the level, only to be met with 2 big, stark white middle fingers at the end. 2 snooty gawoos stood between me and the final level of the game. And the game just flat out wasn't having it. All because, and I have no idea how or why, the game kept shifting me away from the ramps when I tried pulling off stunts. This was so frustrating, and it was all for the sake of these beady-eyed, milk-skinned, mushroom-stock-looking muffin flippers. Every time I rode into the air and pulled off a string of strong stunts to eliminate the last enemies, my hopes and dreams of finally being done with this level were dashed as the camera shifts and reveals I was moved away from a good landing point for no reason, leading me to crashing, wasting my time, and the gawoo laughing in my face. I'm glad I'm giving you all heart attacks. I have no clue why I did this. I don't remember it happened anywhere else in the game, and I had no other option than to just keep trying until by some insane stroke of luck I passed the level. After dozens of tries and literal hours of attempts, I managed to beat the level, only to reach level 5, which honestly wasn't that bad. The enemies were mostly spread out in a reasonable way, there were a lot of fun grind setups, and it had a much better pace to it than level 4. It only took me 2 tries, and that's just because the boss is fighting the Gawoo King while you're in a bowl ramp. There's no way to clearly see where he is above you, but I figured out pretty quick and it made him explode. And so the day is saved, thanks to... Wait, what's happening now? I beat it! You can't make me do it again! Nah! Who cares, it's just a video game. Alright, so it turns out the game isn't done yet, as the Cabalistas are taken to an alternate dimension where all the levels are flipped, and they have to defeat the ghosts of all the Gawoo beaten in the main game. Okay? These are called flip sides, and they're basically a weird form of time trials. You have very little time to clear the ghosts, but you at least have access to the whole stage from the get-go. Also, you don't have to clear out every ghost in a level, you just have to defeat a percentage of them in total, which is nice. Unfortunately, you need 100% done to unlock the super secret final level, and there's no way I'm going through all that again. Let's take out the old Game Shark and see if there's a code. And yeah, I figure there's not one on here. Maybe there's one online. Okay, let's just enter this, and it crashed. Oh well, I doubt I'm really missing anything. Maybe there's something that can... Wait. Oh, you've gotta be kidding! So it turns out there is a more conventional control scheme. With this option, you control movement with the left analog stick, spin with the shoulder buttons, and perform grabs and flips with X and triangle respectively. It's much easier to get to grips with, especially since you can hold the controller normally. So I tried the first few levels with this scheme, and it was kind of better. Levels are still bland, and I was already used to the weird sideways controls, but it was at least easier to get. But yeah, there's no way I'm finishing the flip side. So let's just cover the other modes real quick. There's this trick mode where you have a limited number of runs to complete a string of progressively more challenging trick sequences, with the added condition of needing to complete tricks again if you fail. Yeah, I'm not talking anymore about this one. It's very frustrating. There's also a versus mode for 2 players, but this is one of the last games I would ask someone to play with me, if I even had anyone to play with in the first place. I don't think I felt as mixed about a game as I do with Yanya Caballista, even more so than Gungrave. It's a game I admire artistically. I think the graphics are fun, the music's upbeat and energetic, like surf ska or something, and it's certainly creative with both presentation and gameplay, but that gameplay is the biggest issue the game has. It's just so awkward to control, and the levels themselves have some majorly frustrating design, so I can't really recommend picking it up, unless you're like me and really like finding random obscure PS2 games to play. Which stinks, because I think this game had some serious potential as a fun arcade-style skateboarding game. I can't help but wonder, if this game had a more approachable control scheme and a bigger move list, would it be remembered as more of a hidden gem? Then again, if the controls were changed to be more conventional, it would lose one of its most unique aspects, so lose-lose, I guess. With Yanya Caballista, it's best to make like the general audience when this game first released. Just brush past it as you look for the new Tony Hawk, which these days is actually the old Tony Hawk. Yanya Caballista remake, anyone?